Welcome to Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. Well, as we hit the mid part of the week and headed downhill into the second half of the week and into the weekend, we're kind of just going to be going through the motions as we'll have this nice fall weather continue. It's just that it's so dry and so warm across the West. While we are enjoying this, we just have to kind of get ourselves through the next 5 to 7 days here, especially with the very high fire danger and their tinder dry conditions out there. With the warm, breezy, dry conditions persisting here for a bit longer, there are some areas of moisture in the mid to high levels passing through the West. We talked a little bit about that yesterday. We'll show you that today. That might lead to some very minor weather conditions in some areas. But we do see signs of change finally showing up in the pattern across North America. Now, we're going to see these changes first, not in the West, but in the East. But it's a signal that things are finally going to change. This blocking pattern is finally going to get itself unstuck. But in the meantime, this is from a few days ago, but this is from the Pack Trail fire when the fire really blew up over this past weekend. The smoke and haze do still give you opportunities for really pretty pictures, even though it's a really bad situation. Another shot of some smoke and haze from the fire activity in western Wyoming, and new grass fire up by Chugwater yesterday. So you can just see how brown everything is out there. So be very careful, as fires that get started are going to still have plenty of opportunity to grow in this current environment that we're in right now. Here's a great shot of the Aurora Borealis from western Nebraska that came in. And we'll talk about this here in a second, but there was another coronal mass ejection. So the opportunity to see the aurora may reappear this week as the sun continues to be very, very active. And there's a beautiful shot from western New Mexico. The moon and Venus have been making a really nice showing in the evenings. And for you skywatchers out there, this is just a great shot. This is from what is called the SOHO satellite. This is a satellite that is out in space observing the sun. And this is how we keep track of the coronal mass ejections, the solar flares, and everything else. Now, what you're seeing there is what the most recent coronal mass ejection coming through. But you notice on the right side, that's Comet A3 as it's making its loop between the Earth and the sun. So look at that. It's making its way around, and it's actually beginning to appear in the daylight hours in some areas, although it's very close to the sun, very hard to see. Don't try to look for it, because you'll be looking really directly at the sun. But we'll talk about that comet later, and there's actually another comet that has appeared that could be making a showing later on. But that shows you the coronal mass ejection and the comet at the same time making its way around the sun. Taking a look at the water vapor imagery across the West, you can see that there is some moisture. The problem is that this moisture that you see is mostly at the mid and high levels, not the lower level moisture you need to really generate good chances of precipitation. But there's a little bit of moisture. And there is the most recent shot early this morning of Hurricane Milton with a very well-formed eye. And it's definitely, right now, maximum sustained winds that are 160 miles an hour. There will be some weakening of the hurricane as it approaches Florida, but will still be a major hurricane and will stay hurricane status as it goes through the peninsula. While it will weaken, it will still be at hurricane levels all the way across to the east side before it heads out back across the Atlantic. This is what rainfall is looking like, a narrow band from Tampa Bay to north of Orlando there. Notice that the heaviest rainfall is when it reaches its peak just here, just off the coast. But the winds are going to be extremely damaging in a 10-foot storm surge hitting the west central coast of Florida. When we take a look at the pattern, it's the same thing, different day in terms of the configuration of where the major features are, with the jet stream still with this trough of low pressure across the areas of the west, and the low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska maintaining the high in the west central areas of the United States. We do have that moisture. The precipitable water does show, actually, a bit of above average water content in the air for this day in October, but it's not very deep, as we mentioned. So we will have some weak isolated shower and thunderstorm activity over Colorado, northern New Mexico, maybe over Arizona. This is basically Virga. There might be some sprinkles. That's about it. But there is a little bit of precipitation showing in the forecast. This is through Friday. See this area of moisture up here in Montana? There may be a little pocket of showers across Montana, maybe extreme northern Wyoming here at the end of the week. Again, nothing to write home about, nothing that's going to amount to anything, but we're starting to see at least something on the maps now. Now, this is where things start to change. We still have the deep low in the Gulf of Alaska, but notice this low here in southeastern areas of Canada, north of Lake Superior. We're starting to see an amplification of the ridge across the west that's going to send a fair amount of much colder air south into the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes, into the Corn Belt, into the northeastern United States. The air coming out of this system is going to be fairly chilly, and that's going to spell a change that will lead to changes later. And by Tuesday of next week, notice it makes a further deep push south through the Great Lakes into the northeastern United States. Now, how does that affect the West? Well, west of the divide, it really isn't going to do much, but notice the winds aloft are curving and coming in from the northeast. So what this will do is push a pocket of colder air coming in from the northeast. It'll push it up east of the divide. So for you folks that live along and east of the Continental Divide, there's actually, there it is, some cooler air coming in. And you can see it pushing right up against the Front Range from southeast New Mexico to eastern Wyoming, across the Dakotas, Nebraska, and the Midwest. The temperature anomaly here is pretty impressive. There's going to be a push of colder air. So early next week, Denver, Colorado Springs, Cheyenne, Rapid City, into Nebraska, Scottsbluff, into Kansas, you're going to get a taste of fall. Temperatures are going to really cool off. There won't be much moisture, if any, with it. And you can see all the heat still stays underneath the ridge along and west of the divide. But this change right here, this push coming on in, and notice how the high is getting tilted a little bit more to the northeast. This is a sign that the high eventually is going to give way to part of this storm as it breaks off and comes in, and we finally start to see the changes we want to see up here. That will lead to that colder air coming in, and then here's by the 17th into the 18th. A piece of that storm comes off and becomes a bit more potent. Notice the high is basically going away, weakening rapidly. That will actually lead to some precipitation. This is by next Friday, and this is from Tuesday through Friday of next week. So we actually see some precipitation coming into the Rockies, northern and western Wyoming, parts of Montana, into the Great Basin. This is nothing significant. This, though, is the best chance of measurable precipitation in a long time, especially along and west of the divide. And this will spill in some much cooler air. And there you go. This is by next Friday. So west of the divide is going to see the colder air come in. So the signs of change will come early next week with the colder temperatures east of the divide. Later in the week, colder temperatures and some precipitation comes in west of the divide. And that's going to be kind of like it's going to start in motion, going to put into motion the changes we've been talking about for the latter days of October into November. This is by the following Monday and the Tuesday. Notice the establishment of the high pressure ridge in the Pacific. We don't have the deep low here anymore. That will start the changes to colder, more active weather next week. But it does start late next week and next weekend into the following week. Have yourself a great Wednesday. We'll see you tomorrow.